Coming from New York, Claire Fejes explored the art of social regionalism in Alaska, similar to Paul Gauguin, who portrayed natives in Tahiti. Claire encountered Alaskan natives and documented their subsistence lifestyle in her writings and paintings. With her unromanticized paintings, she initiated a cultural exchange through galleries.
Going into the Arctic and leaving home changed my whole life, and I recommend it to every woman.
Claire Fejes was born in New York in 1920. Although her family had been poor, she was raised with the wealth of great art museums. During the Great Depression, she dragged her sisters to free art classes supported by the Works Progress Administration. There, she became exposed to social regionalism, an art movement emphasizing the working class and rural life, which became an integral theme in her art. Later, she studied sculpture and stone carving. In 1942, she married Joe Fejes. Struck by gold fever, Joe wanted to move to Alaska. Claire followed her husband, and in 1946, they left the bohemian New York art metropolis and moved to Fairbanks, Alaska, a frontier settlement at the end of the highway. With the long, dark, and cold winters in a cramped cabin, Claire transitioned from stone carving to sketching and painting. However, with her growing family, her creativity was pushed aside.
I had 2 kids to do and cook and clean and chop wood in those days, and I was a frustrated artist.
She encountered many natives as they came into town for supplies. Occasionally, when she could paint, traveling natives sat for her, and she began to grow fascinated with their stories and subsistence lifestyle. Fairbanks didn't embrace her early works. The Alaskan artists who were admired at the time were Sidney Lawrence and Ted Lambert, men who depicted grand landscapes and the exploration of the land. As an artist, Claire was frustrated, but she didn't know where to go. Then one day, she ran into the anthropologist Charlie Lucier. He said,
"Well, I just got back from a place called Shishalik. It has no running water, no white people live there, there's no toilet, everybody lives in a tent, and no grocery store." I said, "Gee, that sounds just like the place I want to go."
Now was the time to fulfill herself as an artist, and thus her exploration began. Joe was supportive, thus Claire packed a tent, sleeping bag, some food, and her paints. In July 1958, she caught a mail plane to Kotzebue. In Kotzebue, while having a cup of coffee, a man asked her what she was doing there. When she replied, "I'm going to Shishalik," the man said, "If you look out the window, there are some people from Shishalik in their boat." Dashing out, she went to join them. Just as Kotzebue disappeared from view, the calm ocean whipped up into a storm, waves crashing into the small boat. Claire held an old woman in the boat and helped bail out the boat, but she wasn't afraid. She trusted these Eskimos. Upon her arrival in Shishalik, Claire was embraced by the community, and the old woman from the boat told her instead of pitching her tent at the end of the camp, she should pitch it next to hers. This was the beginning of a lifelong friendship. In Shishalik, Claire lived like Alaska's first people. She slept in a tent, ate seal oil and whale meat, helped cut up meat, and gave art lessons to the children. She sketched and wrote extensive journals about the daily life of the Eskimo people and their strong bond to the land. She was fascinated by their rooted, earthy quality of their movements and how they never bent their knees while cutting meat and picking berries. Whenever she asked people to pose for her, she gave them something in exchange. She would give them cloth, needles, or send them things they needed.
I made sure that I wasn't taking anything without giving back something. I didn't want to be a tourist. I wanted to fit in and live their life and see what it was like, so I could experience the essence of it, and then I could understand where they were coming from and how to paint them.
The Eskimos' lives were simple and honest, and they had met her with courtesy and warmth. These encounters changed Claire's life forever and freed her as an artist. When she returned to Fairbanks, inspiration flowed through her. She turned the living room into a studio. Using her sketches and memories, she painted 20 oil paintings in 1 month, the Shashalik 20. Her bold, unromantic style and use of forms enriched with vibrant colors depicted the essence of the Eskimos. Her paintings depicted mainly women and their daily life. Thus Claire became one of the rare female voices reflecting the women's side of Arctic society. Claire's Shashalik 20 caught the attention of the art world. By 1960, she had a solo show in Seattle and was the first Alaskan to have a one-woman show in New York City.
Claire's art not only was shown within Alaska, many galleries within Alaska, but she reached beyond Alaska. She showed in New York City, she showed in Tokyo, she showed in Germany. She showed it absolutely worldwide, an audience of a life that they had never seen or even thought of before. So she was, through her artwork, she was bringing that culture to a new audience.
She became known as the Gauguin of the Arctic. With her bold colors, simplified forms, and vital paintings, Claire Fejes was compared to Paul Gauguin and his paintings of the Tahiti people. They were both explorers and both lived among the people they painted.
That's a very reasonable thing for people to say, is that she's kind of the Gauguin of the Arctic. And it's a great compliment to her, of course, because he was such an important figure at the end of the 19th century and such an important influence on all of 20th century art. Despite the fact that everybody acknowledges that Gauguin was a great, great artist, one of the things that has been talked about is that he looked at the native people of Tahiti, and he was very much influenced by their culture and by the bright colors that they used in their dress and in their artwork and things of that sort. But he also tended to kind of stereotype them, to pick up on the exotic aspect of the other culture, to exoticize native people rather than looking at them as individuals. And that's something that Claire did differently than either Gauguin or Rockwell Kent, who was another major influence on her work. She went and visited those people and saw them in their own terms and really understood their way of life and portrayed them in the way she interacted with them, which was as individuals more than just exotic examples of a different culture. She depicted them in a different way, not only artistically, but humanistically and anthropologically and in every other way.
For the next 4 decades, she continued to explore and paint the Arctic and its people. Claire published her extensive journal entries about her encounters with the Eskimos in the book People of the Noatak, which was on the New York Times bestseller list. Through her paintings, writings, and gallery, she became an advocate for the people of the North and their lifestyle.
The Alaska House Art Gallery was created by my parents, Claire and Joe Fejes, in order for Claire to show her work, but more importantly, for her to exchange this place with other artists throughout Alaska, specifically the native art and the native artists that she met during her travels. So Claire introduces native art into the Fairbanks community, but also we reach a wider audience because of the visitors, travelers, tourists, adventurers, explorers that travel through Alaska, and they discover this form of art which was basically unknown.
Through her work, she gave the people she met permanence. When painting an old woman, the woman remarked, "Now I will not be forgotten." In 1986, Claire was one of the few women to become an honored fellow of the Explorers Club for her exploration and documentation of the people from the North, preserving a way of life for future generations to see. She received the same honor as Sally Ride, the first American woman in space. Claire's sense of exploration led her to the villages of the Arctic, where she made lifelong friends. The people and culture she encountered would remain her inspiration for the rest of her life, leading to her fulfillment as an artist.
Oh,